Thank you for coming. My name is Tim Thomas. I actually am a fisheries historian and researched the human history of this bay for well over 40 years. I was the historian and curator of the Monterey Maritime Museum for many years, and I've written a couple of books about the Monterey waterfront and her fishing history. And what this tour is sort of a cultural history of the neighborhood here. But everybody came to Monterey, everybody, one to one. They all said the same thing. Every ethnic group that came to Monterey all said how much this place looked like home. They all said it. Also, everybody that came here relied on this bay, one way or another, to survive here, right? It was very difficult in the early days of Monterey. I like to start my tours usually in front of the Harbor House, the pink building right there, which, by the way, did not start its life out as a gift shop, but started its life out as a restaurant. In fact, it was the second restaurant on the Monterey Wharf. It was Hagman's Fish Grotto. And they opened in the late 1920s, and then in 1934, a guy named George Vilas, who was a Greek gentleman who had moved to Monterey from San Francisco in the 20s and had a fish market on the wharf. And then for reasons I've never been able to figure out, when the stock market crashed, he lost his fish market business. I guess people stopped buying fish, I'm not really sure. But he did have these wealthy friends who supported him, and they actually let him, helped him buy this restaurant. They changed the name to the Pilot, hence the blue lighthouse you see on the roof right there. And they had all these sort of fancy little fish painted along the building right there. But John Steinbeck actually wrote about George Vilas. Anybody read Sweet Thursday, which is the sequel to Cannery Row? Really wrote that as a tribute to his best friend Ed Ricketts, who was killed in the train crash in 1948, which is not too far from him. And so he wrote about Vilas. And Steinbeck had just published Cannery Row in 1945. He actually wrote that book in the East Coast. And he wanted to move back to the Monterey area, and he moved here in 1945 with his wife and had two young sons at that time. He bought a little adobe house not too far from here called the Lower Soto Adobe. It's still there today, but it's very small and needed a place to write. And he was going around all the Monterey neighborhood here, all different office buildings, and no one would rent to him. I mean, Steinbeck was kind of a progressive guy. People didn't like some of the things he was writing at that time. Monterey was then, and it still is to a certain time today, kind of a conservative community, and so they wouldn't rent to him. So he'd go down to the Pilot restaurant every day, and he would sit at a table by the windows, and he would write every day. And he always wrote the longhand with pencil. And I think what he was writing when he was here was the Pearl. But he did write about George Vilas. By the way, George Vilas had a nickname. That nickname was Sonny Boy. And why he was called Sonny Boy, we don't know. He wouldn't tell everybody, but this is what he wrote about Sonny Boy. I'll put my glasses on. So he says, Sonny Boy is truly the only Greek-born American named Sonny Boy. He operates a restaurant and bar on the wharf in Monterey. Sonny Boy is plump and getting plumper. Although he was born near Sutro Park in San Francisco and went to public schools, Sonny Boy has single-handedly kept alive the Near East. His perfect round face hints Orange Express and beautiful spies. His bush voice is confidential. Sonny Boy can say good evening and make it sound like an international plot. His restaurants take friends for him and supports him. Perhaps Sonny Boy, in one sense, wears a long back black cape and dines with Balkan countesses where two seas kiss the Golden Horn. But he also runs a good restaurant. Probably there's more secret than any man in the community, where his martinis are a combination of truth serum and Lottie-Tip. That's Steinbeck's idea of Sonny Boy. This is a postcard. This is typical businesses would send these postcards out, or you could pick up the restaurant, advertise the Hagman Fish Grotto. There it is right there from the 20s. And then when George Vilas took it over, rather than just print his own postcards, he just took the old ones, put a rubber stamp right there. All right. So the first real commercial fishing Monterey, I'll use this term commercial because it's truly how they made a living, were the native people, the Indian people of Monterey, who were the Rumsien people. Rumsien was the language they spoke. And we can trace the native culture into the Monterey area about 10,000 years or so. When you think about Monterey, maybe like 1,000 years ago, it was 500 years ago, lots of lakes, lots of fresh water, at least enough to sustain that population was never that big. Huge herds of deer, elk, tule elk, grizzly bear. I read accounts of early explorers from the Monterey area, especially in the fall months, talking about bird life. So many birds, they said, you couldn't see the surface of the lake. So the ducks were dark in the sky. Look out in that bay, out there, be so filled with seals, sea lions, sea lions, sea otters. They actually thought the bay was paved. They were into divers. Monterey Bay is like a brown cobblestone. Certain times of the year, waves and crashes pouring fish onto the beach. That's how abundant it was out there, which tells me there was never any real time of hunger for the Rumsien people. They go out in the bay, these beautiful boats made up tule, and tule, big tall grass, the reeds grow up out in the wetlands. The fishermen was out there. They do the fish to abalone and mussel shell, make fishing on a stinging nettle plant, use traps, baskets, spears, net. And what I personally think is the absolutely coolest thing in the entire world is they're the first diving port of that bay. Monterey Bay is the dive capital of the world, am I right? We took a walk along the waterfront this morning down by the Coast Guard Pier. That place would be filled with rubber people. We were the first divers going into that bay, and we know that. And burials that come out of the ground in recent years. You cannot build a house along this Monterey waterfront without running across a Rumsien burial there too. The males have what's known as surfer's ear, which is a little bony growth that they open every year, spending a lot of time in the cold water like the Monterey Bay. Makes a lot of sense, don't you think? You see an abalone this big, you're going to dive down there and get it. Abalone play a very important part of their life. They ate it. They use the shells like tools, like fish hooks and shovels and bowls. They use the shells to decorate baskets, to make jewelry, and they traded to other Californians things they could not get here in Monterey, like obsidian, which is a volcanic rock, but they're using air points and spear points. Now, perhaps, I know you guys are all too young, but perhaps some of you have seen the old Kevin Costner movie called Dance with Wolves. Remember that movie? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's about India and South Dakota. If you watch that film closely, and it comes on cable TV all the time, you watch that film close, you know it's about abalone, the clothing and the regalia that they're wearing. As far as I know, there is no abalone in South Dakota. You've got to get there some way, right? It's going those trade routes. A lot of it, most of it, starts right here in Monterey. Monterey was literally the abalone capital of the world. Abalone can be traced back to its point of origin. They call Monterey red abalone, and big site as far back as Minnesota. Here is the best one. The word abalone, which is usually all over the world, comes from the Rumsien people. So they had a word for the red abalone, which is this guy right here. This is the largest of the abalones, the predominant abalone in that bay out there. That word was aloon, A-U-L-U-N. And linguists have traced that word aloon all the way back, or traced the word abalone all the way back to that word aloon that starts right here in Monterey. Very cool. So if you're a Rumsien fisherman, you want that bay full of aloon and else out there, you want it to be a beautiful day. Well, those of us who live here know it isn't always like that in Monterey, especially in the summer. We got a thick gray fog. The Rumsien people actually had a song they would sing to get rid of the fog. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to sing it for you, but no, I do this to it. Today I got in my time machine. This morning I went back to the time I recorded them singing that song. To see if we can get rid of some of this great fog. I hope this does what it's supposed to do. I'm not a very technical person. I don't even drive a car. Oh, wow. So far, so good. What that song is saying in Rumsien, it's telling fog to go home. You're on the bay out there. The tug is out there, and he is beating your wife. He's flying to the pole. So here is a drawing of a Rumsien woman. It was done here in Monterey in the 1790s by an unknown Spanish artist. Now, what I love about this drawing is we just show their connection to the bay. The inner skirt would be made of tule. This outer skirt would be deer hide. The black spots you see would be abalone pendants. The cape that she's wearing is probably sea otter pelt. The necklace that she's wearing is a little olive shell, a little sea snail. Then the earpiece that she's wearing here's a close-up. This is what she's wearing in her ears, this piece right here. So I took this photograph a few years ago, actually, at the British Museum in London, in one of their warehouses, actually. And this piece was collected here in Monterey in the 1790s, around the same time that drawing was done, by a pretty well-known British explorer named George Vancouver. And I can see it's partly woven like a basket. In fact, at one time, the acorn woodpecker feathers in that weave. The large white beads are clamshell disc beads. The little white beads along this way are olive shell beads. There's some glass trade beads, abalone pendants. Then this long piece is bird bone. Bird bone is hollow. And we create this design that we today refer to as scrimshod, and they use squid ink to get that dark color. And you wear it in here like you keep a pencil back behind your ear. So you look at this drawing, you can see if you wear them as a pair.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, as they weave these beautiful baskets, they'll weave into the basket abalone shell, clamshell disc beads, arvella shell beads. So the bay is very important to the Rumsien people. Actually, all of Monterey is very important to the Rumsien people. Where we are right now wasn't necessarily a village site, but it was kind of a fishing camp. The bay actually went much further up that way at that time. Easy access to the water here, easy access to fresh water here. Anybody who spends any time in Monterey, walk along the Pacific Grove waterfront, or anybody who's been out to Point Lobos, all right, you look at the ground, look at the dirt on there, how black it is, and there's just little piece of abalone shell, right? And you walk up what we call the lower Pacific up here, and then you go up and you get the ground, it's just pitch black, and it's just filled with abalone pieces, what's referred to as the abalone pavement. That's midden soil. That shows us humans use this land here for thousands of years. We're going to go back. So this is the Century Garden. My name is up on the planters you see here. There's the Memory Garden here and the Historic Garden here. Talk a little bit. So I want you to harken back to your fourth grade education or your, I know those of us who grew up in California did this, but in your high school history class, social studies class, maybe you heard this term, manifest destiny. From sea to shining sea. The United States always had its eye on California, right? California was first settled in 1770 by the Spanish, which is on this tour right here. When Spain was living here, it was very, very difficult to be here. It was like living on a deserted island. You rely on this one supply ship that came once a year. It would bring you letters from home and special kind of food you really like to eat. And oftentimes that ship was late. It was very difficult. In fact, for the Spanish government to get soldiers to come here and man their presidio or man their mission, they had to go to the prisons in Mexico. You guys can stay in jail, or you can go to Monterey. Many chose to stay in jail. Sure, they want to come up here. It's really hard living here. And then in 1822, Mexico declares independence from Spain. You become part of Mexico. They were smart. What they did, they opened the ports and allowed ships to come in, bring all kinds of cargo here. Anybody ever read Victor Dana's 2 Years Before the Mast, which is a wonderful book about California 1830s being like what we call a hide and tallow trade. By the way, Dana did not like California or Monterey, but he wrote these great descriptions of Monterey. In fact, the best description that exists of Monterey at that time. 2 Years Before the Mast. Of course, the Spanish or the Mexicans, they were not into fishing. They never understood how you utilize that bay out there, but they were into raising cattle. That's what the bay used to be for. And all these ships are coming in mainly from the United States, coming from Boston, mainly, or New York, coming into California to get all these cowhides. And so they refer to them as California bucks, right? And perhaps you heard that dull said going up in the custom house over there. And you all know what a custom house is, right? Yeah. Custom house is just a big tax house. That's what it was. And they would tax all these ships that come in and bring all this cargo. And I've seen these manifests for many of these ships. And you name it, they had everything on those ships there. Everything from toys and kitchen supplies, and fireworks and cloth and all kinds of different things. A lot of these ships would come in there and unload half the cargo at Carmel Beach where nobody was. They wouldn't get taxed for that stuff when they came into Monterey. But they were coming back with all these cowhides. And so the cowhides represented $1, and all the sailors went between the custom house and the beach from the custom house. They passed the cowhide over the head one by one by one. Perhaps you heard this term, we're passing the buck. They're passing that California buck. Right, that's what they're doing. And they take those cowhides back to Boston, where they turn into leather, in particular shoes. That was the main part that turned out all of that. But also, to me anyway, the most important part, the big leather conveyor belts. We're in the factory, they're turning machinery parts and other products. Eventually comes back to California. It all works in a big circle, right? So as I mentioned, the United States always had its eye on California. So in 1846, we kind of create this little war down on the Rio Grande, and we go to war with Mexico. So United States Navy commander of the Pacific had standing orders. We went to war with Mexico to sail your ship into Monterey and take the town of Monterey because Monterey was the northern capital for Mexico at that time. The commander of the Pacific at that time was a guy named John Drake Sloat. He was an older gentleman. His health wasn't very good. He was actually off the coast of Mazatlan at that time. And he heard these rumors we went to war with Mexico, but he wasn't sure. I mean, he didn't get email or CNN or anything, but he sailed his ship, he had 3 of them, from Mazatlan up the Pacific coast into Monterey, actually got to Monterey on July 1st, 1846, and sat out there for a week. Because he didn't see him going out there. There was no war he could see when he went out there. He was a little unsure about it. Finally, a guy by the name of Thomas Larkin, who was a local important guy here in Monterey, he finally convinced him, yes, we are at war with Mexico on July 7th, 1846. He sent Marines in, they raided the American flag, like 100,000. That instant, Monterey, along with thousands of acres of the West, became part of the United States. We weren't a state yet. We got this border deal with, it went on for a couple more years. They finally settled it, and they signed it to become a treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Essentially, the United States bought all this property from Mexico for about $15 million at that time. And Monterey went to sleep at that point. They did hold the California Constitutional Convention in Monterey in the fall of 1849, and in October they signed that Constitution, and this is their word. They did not want Monterey to be the capital. One of the great myths of Monterey was always the first state capital. It never was the state capital of this part of the United States. And the first capital was San Jose, then went to Phoenicia, and back to San Jose, and then eventually goes to Sacramento because gold was discovered on the American River, right? Monterey was never the state capital because they felt, and this is their words, that Monterey was a Mexican town. They wanted to get away from that whole idea. But once they did that, and Monterey eventually comes to state, California becomes a state in September 1850, and Monterey goes to sleep. Literally referred to in the press of the day was Rip Van Winkle town, the town that went to sleep. But I think a lot of amazing things happened about that. One of them was there was a small group of Chinese fishermen and their families sailed across the North Pacific in 3 small 30-foot junks. After a series of currents, push them all the way around. The Chinese called that black tide, the big drain. Some of the swimming in the Cape Mendocino in Northern California, turned right, hit over California, so it actually overshot Monterey into Mexico, and turned around, fight these currents back, like finally ran out of Point Lobos. They were taken in at a Rumsien village there that nursed them back to health. They got healthy, they looked on that bay out there, and they said, hey, nobody's fishing out there. And the reason nobody's fishing out there, because at that time there was no way to get fresh fish to big markets like San Francisco, because the railroad hadn't arrived here yet. The Chinese, and this actually is a really big deal, understood the technology of drying all of their tanks. They dry all of their fish. And once a month or so, the big Chinese junks come down to San Francisco, pick up all that dried fish. They're shipping it back to China, they're shipping other Chinese camps along the west coast here, but they're also selling fresh fish to local citizens here in Monterey. They brought an economy. Next year, another wave came and settled about where Monterey Aquarium is today, Hopkins Marine Station. That become the largest Chinese fishing village on the west coast. Here's a couple of photographs. This photograph was taken in 1874 here at that village in Pacific Grove. You can see what, if you look closely in the photograph, and what do you guys notice right down there?
Children.
Exactly. Those kids were born here. American citizens. So it's important about the Chinese. Number one, they're the first to really show us what was out there, how to utilize that bay out there. It's really important about the Chinese. As far as we know, Monterey is the only place that brought their families with them. All the other Chinese coming to California in the mid-19th century, most single men, some worked in the railroad, some worked in the gold field. These guys came to fish, and they came here like they knew what was here. And there are historians I know that believe the Chinese were in California as far back as the 5th century. They had the ships, they had the skills, they had the technology, so they could have been. We don't know that, and probably will never know that for sure. Here's another photograph of that village site in Pacific Grove. By the way, the name of this village is Point Ohlone. You see little houses stuck out of the rocks out there. If you look at the 19th century map of Monterey, Point Ohlone is right in the deck of the Monterey Aquarium. So if you know the history of the Chinese, I don't know a lot of this, but there was, of course, as you all know, a great deal of anti-Chinese sentiment. At the turn of the 20th century, a piece of property belonged to the Civic Improvement Company, which was a huge conglomerate at that day. And they owned about 8,000 acres of Monterey Peninsula. And they had plans for big fancy mansions out here, bathhouse out there, pools. But the Chinese had a really good lease. They weren't going. They actually offered a property all over the Monterey Peninsula. So why should we go? It's been almost 50 years. They weren't going. April 1906. There's a massive earthquake and fire in San Francisco displaced everybody who lived there, including the Chinese community. Where are they going to go? They came here to this village because they had family living there. So now they're not only not leaving this village is getting big. It's almost a month today of the earthquake in San Francisco on May 16, 1906. There's a fire in this village. Burns off a third of it down. No one died in it. And there's another fire actually in this village before that. And it still took about a year to get them off of this property, but when they did, a small group of them moved down to what is now Mackey Beach on Chandler Row. A lot of left Monterey area went up into Central Bay area, back into that area right there. All right. So let's see if I can do this correctly. This. Look, that's why I never have any
money around.
So this key right here, this very key I'm holding right here, changes the history of Monterey forever. This is a switch lock key for the Southern Pacific Railroad. This is the key. Open the lock to push the track about the train to Monterey. The original railroad came, it was actually a local railroad, Monterey Valley narrow gauge. It was, in 1874, they built that little road so they could have grains and fruits and vegetables were shipped to Monterey. So we shipped out of Monterey. Also, they wanted to attract tourism to the Monterey area. Nobody came here. And Monterey was a dangerous place. It literally was the Wild West. And there were saloons and gambling parlors on every corner of Monterey at that time. It was just a dangerous place. They don't want to go there. That particular road did not do very well. They almost went bankrupt. They were bought out in 1879 by the Southern Pacific. When they bought that railroad, they also bought 8,000 acres of Monterey Peninsula because they had this quirky idea they could turn Monterey into a tourist paradise. Who thinks such a thing? Right? So all these tourists come to stay in Monterey without a place for them to stay. They built a beautiful hotel called the Hotel Del Monte, where the Naval Force Graduate School is today. They actually built that hotel in 3 months. It opened in June of 1880. At one point, it was the largest and fanciest hotel in the world. What the hotel really was what they called a winter hotel. And Mark Hotel for rich folks who live in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York. Hey, get those cold winters. Come to Monterey. Got a couple of months at the Hotel Del Monte. A lot of folks who do that. And the folks staying in the hotel, well, you got to have stuff for them to do. They created that 17-mile drive, which, by the way, was never 17 miles. And they had golf, and they had, eventually had golf and polo, and a beautiful garden, and they had sport fishing out in the Monterey Bay. In those days, all the Monterey commercial fishing, all fished the same way. They fished with gill net, which is net you just across your boat, fish in the net, get caught by their gills, and it's the same gill net, which is pretty good for most things, but it really wasn't really effective to catch large, heavy salmon. And they're also using hand lines, it also wasn't all that easy to catch salmon, so they weren't making a lot of money. So they make ends meet. No pun intended, they hook themselves up to go sport fishing, and all come and stay at the Hotel Del Monte. They take them out in a little boat, and show them the good places to fish salmon in the bay. They're a fishing guide, like they would do in Europe. So these sport fishermen were very sophisticated fishermen. They had a lot of money, so they always had the newest in technology, and they were fishing salmon today with a rod and reel. Wow, that's important. And they were fishing salmon with a trolling line. Line a lot of hooks on it, you drag through the bay as the boat is moving, which is a really effective way to catch salmon in the bay out there. But a Monterey commercial and say, well, wait a minute, I think we could do that. And I have salmon on the record for back at time, you can see it. 1892, they caught 5,000 pounds of salmon. They switched to trolling technology. 1895, they caught 95,000 pounds of the salmon in that bay out there. It gets the attention of a guy named Frank Booth. Remember that name? Frank Booth. All that starts right here. This is the Duarte family store right here. The Duarte family has a number of little businesses along the Monterey waterfront to cater to the tourist trade. This is one of their business, the Marine Museum. See abalone shells here, the glass bottom boat ride. You can see whalebone hanging over here, taxi, dinner nest. These are whalebone parts here, the whalebone vertebrae with common history painted on it.
Is this on the wharf?
No, this wasn't on the wharf. There's the whalebone chairs right there, offset-bone chairs. Not very comfortable. Mr. Duarte is sort of an agent of these commercial fishermen. He's the guy that hooked them up, these commercial fishermen with their foot fishermen. And this little store is actually right there. But when this photograph was taken, actually where the bounties all was moved in the 1920s. I think it was back there. Called the House of Gold because it had a big safe in this building. So all the gold miners coming from the gold fields, California to Monterey, they would keep storing their gold in his safe here. The bars you see on the windows were put there not to keep people from getting in, but to keep grizzly bears from getting in. So this complex we call Heritage Harbor. Heritage Harbor has sort of a checkered history here. Actually, in 1969, urban renewal came in and just changed all this part of Monterey. There was a road actually to run right through here. And then how people lived, little houses all throughout this whole area right down here. It was very controversial when they did all of that. And supposedly there's a very famous picture of an older Sicilian woman being turned out of her house, still sitting in a chair like a policeman, because she wouldn't leave her house. Suppose she put zinc on the property here. So the original idea of this complex was to have sort of a little mini Carmel, you know, with fancy art galleries and gift shops and restaurants, and that just never happened. And over the years, gone through various different ownerships. And today, actually belongs to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, owns all the property.
Wow.
With a couple of exceptions, and they're going to own everything at some time in Monterey, actually. But what that aquarium does, they lease it mainly to other nonprofits. So that National Sanctuary has its main offices right over here, and there are other offices here, Nature Conservancy, and other ones that are all here in this complex here. The one thing those original builders did do, which I thought was good, is they worked with the local history community. They had the buildings named after famous Montereyans, right? So this building, believe it or not, actually is the Banaka building, named after the old Japanese fisherman behind you, and a guy named Frank Banaka. Frank Banaka came to Monterey in 1906. He was actually 6 years old when he came to Monterey, born in San Francisco. And his family came down to fish salmon here in Monterey Bay. And Monterey was then, and still is today, a small town, right? And there is, actually not there is, once was a thriving Japan town in Monterey, over where the ballpark is, and near the sports center, and there's a JAC Hall is there. That was once a thriving Japan town right there. But right across the fence line, there'll be a Portuguese fisherman or Italian fisherman. Not the time, doesn't how many times they would exchange foods across the fence line. And all these kids grew up and they went to school together, and they went and played baseball together. Frank was a baseball player. He went to Monterey High School. He was a good baseball player. He was a pitcher. And he told me he got to see Joe DiMaggio play baseball at that ballpark across from the JAC Hall today. And he told me, he said, Frank, if Joe DiMaggio, the son of a fisherman, be a baseball player, then Frank Banaka, the son of a fisherman, be a baseball player. Frank's dad said, no, you will be a fisherman. When Frank arrived at Monterey High School, he became a fisherman. And in 1928, he got his first sardine boat, the Ohio No. 3. Anybody know what that means in Japanese, Ohio? You guys know? It means good morning in Japanese. And so he got his first boat. I got a picture of it. Here's Frank. Here's his little boat, the Ohio No. 3, right here. This is called a purse seiner, the first type of netting that it uses. This boat in 1928, believe it or not, it cost up to $30,000, which doesn't include the net, which is another $10,000 or $15,000. So oftentimes somebody else will own that net, and they just share in the catch the boat brings in. I said, Frank, where'd you guys get the money? They didn't want a wealthy family. He said there was an engine company up in Francisco called Enterprise Eating Company. They just designed a brand new kind of experimental diesel engine. Came down to Monterey. Said, anybody willing to put our engine to your boat, we'll carry the note for you. Frank is the only guy that raised his hand, and that's how he gets his boat. But here's the thing, Frank was the youngest fisherman. All of California had one of these boats, and he was the first Japanese in all of California had one of these boats in Monterey. Very, very important. Also, what I mentioned, I've been doing this work for a very long time. In Monterey is the only place that I have found, only place, where the fishermen have one union. In Southern California, Northern California, all the ethnic groups have their own separate unions. Monterey has one. It's primarily because Monterey was and is a small town. These guys that grew up together, they all went to school together, but the real key that I found, these boys all played baseball together at that ballpark with Jack Parker. It was not uncommon for the young Japanese boys to learn to speak some Italian before they learned to speak English, and those Sicilian boys learned to speak some Japanese. I've only seen here in Monterey, no other place. Right here. All right. So this building down here where the sanctuary is, it says the Wan Yi, that's the Wan Yi building. Wan Yi was a Chinese immigrant who came to Monterey in 1918, opened a little jungle store across from the aquarium today called the Wing Chong Market. Wing Chong loosely translates in Cantonese to meaning beautiful, prosperous. That store catered mainly to the cannery workers. You name it, he sold in there, including rubber boots and rubber aprons, also a little rooming house upstairs that also catered to the cannery workers. And he does pretty good in that business, but he really makes his big money in the squid business. So, when Azorean arrives in 1874, it brings other folks to Monterey. Because now we have a way to get fresh fish to big markets like San Francisco. Now other folks come to fish in Monterey, in particular the Italians, not the Sicilians yet, but the Genovese. You come across the bay from Santa Cruz, coming down from San Francisco to fish primarily for rockfish. The Chinese have learned years before that squid are nocturnal. According to Pittsburgh, on the side of the boat, just attracted to the surface. They'll scoop them with big baskets, bring them onto the beach and drop. So while the Italians are home sleeping, the Chinese are out fishing for squid. No competition. No one wants squid then. Squid was considered to be junk fishing at the time. Right? Around the turn of the 20th century, the city of Monterey banned the drying of squid within the city limits. If you ever smell dried squid, you would actually understand why they did that. I used to bring along on my tours and I stopped doing it. We moved all the squid drying along Los Angeles Highway, these fields across the airport, the beach area referred to as Tarpey Flat. There's 3 large Chinese squid drying grounds out there. Wan Yi is the largest of the squid drying grounds. Why is the squid from the fishermen? They're trucked out to the ground, they dip it in brine, lay on the ground to dry for 10 or 12 days. You need a job in those days, you go to work for Wan Yi, and they'll pay us 25 cents an hour to wake up squid, big piles like this one right here. Oh my God. This is all dried squid that you see right here. You should refer to this as Squid Mountain.
What's that hill?
Sorry?
What's that? That hill is squid?
They cut, yes, it's all squid. Also known as heliotrope hill because of the purple color in it, but also known as halitosis hill because of the smell like dried squid.
It smelled bad, huh?
Oh, really bad. And here is more Squid Mountain. This is Wan Yi squid grind grounds here. You see guys pick up squid. We need a job. We go to work in those days. We go to work for Wan Yi. Pay us 25 cents an hour to pick up squid, big piles like this one right here. And then he had a secret process to get the dirt off it in the ground at that time. So you can see this conveyor contraption here. The tarp on the ground here. You run the script to conveyor from one by one. It drops out towards that tarp. There's a hose in it to blow here to blow the dirt off that squid. They're punching it down this machine right here into burlap sacks. In those days, the shipping companies weren't charging by weight, but by volume, and he's shipping it. He's shipping it to Asia. There's Wan Yi right there on Monterey Wharf, all bundled squid behind him. And he's shipping it to China, he's shipping it to Japan, he's shipping it to Hong Kong. To give you an idea of how well he was doing in the dried squid business, in 1930, when this photograph was taken, he was making well over $30,000 a year in the dried squid business. The name of that dried squid business was Wing Chong. It definitely was beautiful, prosperous for Mr. Yu. All right. Actually, early Chinese, in the 19th century, they were drying squid and also shipping to China, and they would put it in barrels full of salt. And they're getting the salt from Moss Landing. There was sea salt. They're making sea salt there. And what we think they were after in China was not the squid so much, but the salt. They were salt was going on in China at that time. Salt was a really important.
So they were packing it in between.
Yeah, you pour salt, pack it in. The salt also draws all the moisture out of that squid. The first brick house, Monterey like to call itself the city of first, right? First library, first newspaper, first theater, first brick house. Also, they had the first pie. They already missed that one. But there was a guy named Jack Swan who was an English sailor who actually opened the rooming house where the first theater is today. And he would go down to the, I love this story, he'd go down to the wharf to get the sailors to come stay at his rooming house, his boarding house, and get the steady off to do their laundry, which was a really important thing. But he also made the first pie in California. So this was built by a guy named Gavin Dickerson, and Dickerson came to Monterey via the Donner Party. So you know that story of the Donners, right? You know, actually it was a big group of people, and when they got to Salt Lake City, half of them said, hey, we found this new shortcut through the Sierra. The other half said, including Mr. Dickinson here, said, oh, no, I'm not trying that. We'll go the old way. And we went the old way, the southern route. So we didn't get stuck in the Sierra. They got to Monterey, didn't want to live in so old adobe. Heck with that, he was from the East Coast. He had these bricks made and built this little house here, but he never actually lived in it. Because gold discovered on the American River, he took off to the gold fields. In 1852, 1853, he got in John Pope Davenport, who was a whaler in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Anybody here read Moby Dick? That's kind of his story. He was a deep water whaler in New Bedford, and he was about 50 at that time. He had just married a young woman. She was half of his age. And she didn't want to go on these long 3, 4, and 5-year whaling cruises, and he was ready to retire. So he said, honey, let's compromise. I mean, isn't that the basis of a good marriage? You compromise, right? So let's move to California. Let's move to Monterey. We'll set up a shore whaling business. While whale during the day, come home at night. She agreed, and so he packed up his wife, packed up a Portuguese whaler that worked for him. They sailed along the California coast, and they came up to Monterey, came in, and moved into this little book called right here. Was this ad in the Monterey paper? Looking for whalers. There's no whalers living in Monterey in 1852. But he was able to find some guy who was willing to give it a try, and he spent most of that first season just trying to teach you guys how to be whalers. He wasn't making a lot of money at it, and then the price of whale oil dropped, and so he left Monterey the next year, went down to Mexico, and whale in a place called Scammers Lagoon. That's where all the gray whales go to cap every year in Scammers Lagoon. And that's named after a whaler guy named Charles Scammers who discovered that. And then he came back to Monterey, actually had a whaling station where the first theater is. He eventually went across the bay to near Santa Cruz to a town called Davenport.
Oh, Davenport.
So in the 18th century, 19th century, whales and whaling products in this country we used to have the big whaling company, and then Nantucket and Bedford would go on these 3, 4, and 5-year whaling cruises. Usually the first one they went to the Azores. It was wild up the coast of Portugal, pick up these Azorean whalers who are known to this day to be great whalers. They sail on the eastern seaboard and around the Cape Horn, up the California coast, all the way to Alaska, and all the way across the Pacific to Japan. And they wouldn't return to their home port to build the whole of the whaling ship of whale oil. And this could take up to 5 years until you got home. And you don't get paid on the whaling ship until you get home. Something happened in California in 1848. Gold discovered on the American River, and all these ships come into San Francisco. And let's face it, let's say we all Public Whaling Company out of Nantucket had to smell dead whale every single day for the last 2 years, and they told her go up the hills to take them. What are you going to do? Heck with that whaling. I'm getting me some of that gold. That's exactly what these Azorean whalers did. But after the gold fields, though, they found out that it wasn't as easy as they were told. They said, the heck with that, I'd rather be whaling. Go back to San Francisco. They have no money because they get gold, and they have no way to get home. Everyone abandoned their ship. Their kind of stuff. So in 1854 or so, 17 guys were sitting on the pier in San Francisco, heard about Mr. Davenport's operations in Monterey. One guy goes, yeah, Monterey. Should have looked a lot like home, and there are a lot of whales down there. So he migrated down from San Francisco, set up a whaling station in this building right here, and began whaling what they call the old-fashioned way, little teeny 28-foot boats. 6 guys in a boat. Can you imagine hunting a 100-foot blue whale, a little teeny boat like this? This is how they do it. Push off each every morning, row or south to the whaling ground. They'll see a whale, the sky at the bow will yell out, Balea, which means whale in Portuguese. Five, this gun called the Greener's gun, because invented by a guy named Greener, has a harpoon in it with a rope attached to it that was attached to the boat. Now, this gun was not designed to kill whales, but fact was designed to slow them down. So if you're a whale and hit with a sharp harpoon like that, what are you going to do? Sometimes those whales will turn and sink those boats, or sound or dive to the bottom, and even fast enough to cut the rope, they got dragged down with them. And most of the time, the whales start running through the bay here, dragging these guys behind them for hours at a time. A lot of people who live in Monterey, right up the coastline here, watch these guys get dragged through the bay. We used to call that a Nantucket sleigh ride.
A what?
Finally, a Nantucket sleigh ride. Finally, the whale would slow down. Yes, they'd hit big long hand harpoons, and yes, they'd kill it, and that was the name of the game. And usually the whale will sink. So they'll put markers out there because it'll float back to the surface about 10 days later. Anybody ever raised goldfish? You know how that works, right? They go out together, tie a rope behind his tail, they'll tow it back to the beach. It took all day and 2 boats to do that. So they strip off the blubber. That's all they wanted was the blubber. Getting mostly grazing humpbacks here, and that's all it was good for. And one air parts these dead whale, and then tow the carcass of that dead whale, because honestly the smell was so horrendous. They tow the carcass of that dead whale back onto the bay out there. And the currents, being up there here in Monterey, would push the carcass of that dead whale onto the beach over there that we today call Del Monte Beach. They got a beach full of dead whale. What else is you can get down there? Sure didn't smell very good, that's for sure. Big, giant grizzly bears from the hill behind us here, up down to feed off the carcass of a dead whale, because grizzly bears love to eat whale. I read accounts of people who lived in Monterey in those days. They said at night, the grizzly bears walking through their neighborhood. So anybody around here complaining about raccoons getting into their garbage, yeah, forget it. So he stays awake from that part of town. A whale is down here boiling down blubber. So you're whaling all day, boiling blubber all night, you get kind of hungry. Oftentimes they'll cook up a specialized Portuguese pastry in the hot whale oil, or they'll throw chicken in the hot whale oil to cook up. Of course, they're selling the whale oil, which they use in lubricate machinery parts into burning lamps. In the 19th century, all lighthouses relied on whale oil as its light source. So the whale industry in Monterey actually was very, very profitable. Also very, very competitive. There were 17 whalers in 1854, but by 1870 there were a couple hundred here. Some people have families, they're living here. There were up to 5 whaling companies operating in that bay at one time. It would not be uncommon for more than one whaling company to converge into the same whale and have battles on the bay over whose whale belonged to. You actually end up suing each other in court. So the harpoonist, who's actually this guy here, these 2 guys that switch places after they supply the green ground, he works with a local blacksmith, puts a skip mark and tips his harpoon point. You go, oh! The judge goes, oh, that's Jose's harpoon. That whale belongs to the Monterey Whaling Company. The Monterey Whaling industry began to slow down after 1874. Not because these guys took too many whales. The truth is they lost far more whales than they ever got. It never was even a full-time job. But other popular businesses began to replace oil. In particular, kerosene came on the market. They couldn't compete with that. Full-time farmers, ranchers, dairymen, other kinds of fishermen. Portuguese whalers started tuna fisheries in California. So they're trying to eat a tuna sandwich. You can have this guy right here for it. There's one company that continued to operate strictly for the tourists to come and stay at the Hotel Del Monte and loved to watch you guys get dragged to the bay, which they could see from their hotel window, right? In fact, I have evidence that the Hotel Del Monte actually had a contract with the Monterey Whaling Company, right? Just to hear their guests at the hotel. But today, Monterey, actually, all of California is a very large Portuguese community because there are whaling stations from Eureka, California, all the way down to San Diego, all Portuguese, right? Big business, right? A lot of the descendants who came to Monterey can trace their descendants to the original 17 whalers that came to Monterey in 1854. Anybody here know when the last whaling station in California closed? Anybody want to guess?
1880s, 90s.
No, so you need to put about 100 years to that. It was in 1972. It was in Richmond, California. It was Del Monte Foods. Most for dog and cat food. That's when the Marine Mammal Protection Act was put. All of us here, except for you guys, all of us here have probably used whale oil, whaling products at one time or another. This was a can of Texaco home lubricant. This is for the 1950s. This would have been mostly all whale oil in this can. Remember those Singer sewing machines, the little oil can? That was all whale oil. So when Del Monte Foods closed their rail fishery in 1972, they had a lot of whale oil still left. They were still able to use it and sell it, so they got rid of all of it. But yeah, it was So I showed that picture of Men's Duarte store, all those whalebone products they dealing making, and they made all these different things. In fact, I have a couple of them. I have this beautiful three-dimensional carved piece of San Carlos Cathedral with abalone inlay, which I found. Believe it or not, I found this on eBay. eBay was the museum curator's best friend. We found things we'd never think we'd see. And it actually was called a votive candle. It had a purple candle. I also had this little book covers all made out of whalebone, and inside the pages were at least crushed seaweed from a collector on Monterey. And I have found out recently that there was a group of women in Pacific Grove in the 19th century that were collecting and pressing seaweeds for UC Berkeley. And I believe they're the same ladies who were pressing seaweeds for those of the books that were being sold at Mandatory Day Store and other places like that. Also, at one time, all the sidewalks in Monterey made out of whalebone. That's the last of it right there.
Oh, wow.
So this is all whalebone that you see.
Wow.
So this is State Park. So over the years, people have taken pieces out of here, and to State Park's credit, they actually replaced it with actual whalebone. So it's still all there, but it's the vertebrae. And it's what they call it.
Looks like concrete. Yeah, it does.
So here I am. Here we are here. Here's our Portuguese whaler with his greener's gun. This balcony was actually added in the 1920s. And there's a hotel in this building at one time. And the sign over the door says Old Monterey Whaling Company. They call themselves the Old Monterey Whaling Company because they're whaling the old-fashioned way. So I was doing some research a while ago on the internet, and I ran across this company called the Old Whaling Company. That got my attention, so I clicked on it, and it turns out it's a company in South Carolina that makes beauty products for women. Something called body butter. I don't even know what that is. But I bought some. It's not made out of whale oil or anything. But I contacted them. I asked why they call themselves the Old Whaling Company, and they never responded. So this is the Dolter building. It's named after a German restaurateur named Papa and his Dolter. I actually wrote a book about Pop Dolter. Pop Dolter came to Monterey in 1907 with his large family, opened a little restaurant on Alvarado Street called the Cafe Ernest. It's a European-style, Bohemian-style restaurant. And people come spend the whole evening in the restaurant. And then, believe it or not, in those days, people in Monterey did not eat a lot of seafood. But they did eat oysters. Oysters were very, very popular. We don't get a lot of oysters in Monterey. So they had to come by train because they raised oysters in oyster farms in the Oakland estuary. If you know anything about trains in those days, trains had a tendency to break down, there'll be a cow on the track, something would slow that train down. Not the time Pop would go down to the train station to pick up his order of oysters and they would be spoiled. Like any kind of seafood product, especially shellfish, they'll stay fresh very long. So always something new they could serve in his restaurant. We're going to back up a little bit. In 1895, a Japanese immigrant by the name of Otto Sabaru Noda immigrated to Monterey. Noda was a labor contractor. As I mentioned a couple of times, at that time, the Southern Pacific Railroad, or the Pacific Improvement Company, owned about 8,000 acres of the Monterey Peninsula. And Noda was bringing in Japanese workers to clear land for the Pacific Improvement Company. And he was providing these workers food and water and wood for their fires. And so he was gathering wood one day near the Monterey Wharf, looked down into the harbor, and he just sees all this abalone down there. In fact, so much abalone, he described it in letter as being a carpet of abalone. And nobody doing with it. And the reason nobody's doing with it is because nobody knew what the heck you're supposed to do with it. Unless you're preparing abalone properly, it's kind of eating a rubber food. The Japanese, who were dealing with abalone for centuries, they knew what to do with it. So the other side, writes this letter about going to Japan and said, hey, all this abalone here, nobody wants it. The government of Japan sent a guy by the name of Jinosuke Kodani, whose family was in the abalone business in the Chiba Prefecture of Japan. In fact, they're famous for the salted dried abalone. In between this time, Noda goes down to what is now Cannery Row and leases a piece of property there. And if you know Cannery Row, there's an empty lot next to the El Torito restaurant. He leases that piece of property. He sends back to Japan for other Japanese fishermen, because there's a Japanese fishing colony on that side. Kodani comes to Monterey, goes, oh, this is great. A lot of abalone. These abalone are big. He says, they send back to Japan for abalone divers, known as ama, or free divers. They come, they get picked up at the train station, taken down to the train station. Hang on, taken down to, here's Mr. Cordani here, handsome guy that he was. They pick up the train station, take down to Noda's camp on Cannery Row. Here they are, here's our almond divers. Three of these guys arrived here, three of them, these are two of them. They arrived in late 1897, probably late December 1897. I've actually seen their passports, so I know who they are. They were picked up, taken on the Lotus train, Lotus campsite, got dressed the next morning in traditional almond gear, which you can see consists of a white thin cotton outfit here, abalone basket, abalone pry, a pair of goggles, which had pig belly in it. They would squeeze to help against depression. Got that dressed that first morning, went to Monterey, jumped into the water. About 10 seconds before I jumped, I got this sound. Donnie song. You didn't tell us how cold that water is. There's a 15-degree water temperature difference in Monterey and Japan, at least where these guys come from. 15, that is a huge difference. Now we make a lot of it. The truth is they're diving like this in Monterey Bay into the 1920s. These guys are good at it. It was tradition for them. How they work, they usually work on a boat, well, just a pair of them. In the middle of that little boat would be a barrel with a fire going constantly that they could use to warm up after they come out of the water. And they would trade off back and forth. So one diver went to the water, tie a rope around his waist, it went through a pulley system. We'd go down to the Monterey Bay, usually following the anchor line down, going 30, 40, 50 feet into the bay. Now keep in mind, he's holding his breath the whole time, right? And some guys can hold their breath up to 8 minutes. When he's ready to come to the surface, his partner in that boat will take the other of that rope, which has a big weight attached to it, usually just a big rock, and they'll toss to the side of the boat, they'll yank the guy back to the surface, and they'll warm himself up in the fire while the other guy goes into the water. By the turn of the 20th century, they ran helmet divers to Monterey. By the way, by this point, Donnie, they just lay around the Monterey Peninsula out to Point Lobos. Likely out of Point Lobos, reminded of being at home, and it was isolated out there. At that time, Point Lobos belonged to a guy named A.M. Allen. A.M. Allen was a mining engineer. At one time, there was a coal mine out there. They were producing a really low-grade coal, so they weren't making a lot of money out there. And so he bought the property from his partners, and he leased a small part of that property to Kodani at Point Lobos. And you know Point Lobos where the whaler's cabin is, and down below that was where Kodani was, and across the way too was all what he leased, all the whole property down there. And he watched all of it for about a year and said, hey, these guys are making money, and he became Kodani's partner. They do send for helmet divers. This was a photograph taken at Point Lobos about 1900, and you can see here the boat, by the way, was converted whale boat that were out there. And here's a Portuguese whale that worked for Kodani, A.M. Allen actually, and all Japanese crew. But even for these helmet divers, that water was too cold. So they all learned to be knitters. They take a wool sweater and tear them apart. They knit this wool door, put on a pair of that, sometimes 2 pairs of that, put on their clothes, put on a big heavy canvas suit. This has about 65 pounds of lead weights to the front and back, tie the lead to their shoes, bolt on that helmet, which has a hose attached to it, and go down into the Monterey Bay. In the early days, as you can see in this photograph here, they would hand pump the air down to the diver. He's going down 15, 20, 30, 40 feet into the bay. The deeper he went, the harder it was to pump. Then in the 1920s, they put air compressor in the boats, and now they're pushing the air to the diver with a motor. None of them are going 50, 60, 80, even up to 100 feet into the Monterey Bay. But at that level, all I'm going to hear is a diver. At that level, you can't see anything. So you're out working on your hands and knees trying to find abalone. And you can't stay down there very long because the pressure is so strong, it'll create air bubbles in your bloodstream that they popularly call the bends. It could kill you. So they work very slowly to a 30-foot level. They're down there all day collecting abalone. I love this particular photograph. All the gear, by the way, that they used, all the dive gear, came from Japan. They didn't like the American gear. They liked the Japanese gear. In fact, there was a Japanese company that's still in Tokyo that was producing that wool underwear, particularly for the divers here in Monterey, California. But look at the picture. Here's the divers. And what I love about the picture, I can tell you the gear is brand new because there's no dent on any of those helmets. It's brand new because the current's so strong, it kicks them up, push them on the rock kick them in the helmet, all kinds of different things. So what the Japanese doing with all this abalone, because there was no Western market for it, they were drying it and shipping it back to Japan. Dried abalone in Japan is a very important commodity, not just a food product, but culturally it's very important. At that time they would take dry abalone and they would cut it in really thin strips and pound it to get to these really long strips. Very, very thin. They're almost a lost art. There's only a few people in all of Japan that still does that kind of work today. And oftentimes, particularly at New Year's, you'll get given a card with drip dried abalone inside that card because it represents good luck. But then around the turn of the 20th century, Kodani and Alice up a cannery and finally began to can abalone, try to create a Western market for it. And they're also shipping the canned product to Japan. So they didn't want the canned product in Japan. They wanted that dry product in Japan. And they were providing quite a bit for it at that time. So Papa Ernest, watching all this dry abalone leaving the Monterey, he said, yeah, abalone, kind of like giant oysters. Bring in his restaurant one day, experiments with it, come up with famous recipe, slice the foot. That's all it is just a big marine snail, right? You slice the foot, you pound it, you don't just pound it, there's actually a certain technique for doing that. Then you have an egg wash, cook quickly with olive oil and butter. And soon people came from all eat fresh abalone steaks from Pop's restaurant and sing songs and write poets. Like some folks boast the quail on toast because they think it's Tony, but I'm content to own my range and live on abalone. George Sterling wrote his guest books in 1913. 1913 is a very, very important year. 1913, the state of California made it illegal for the Japanese to ship dried abalone out of the state of California. Now, they could ship the canned product, they couldn't ship the dry product. And they mentioned they didn't want the canned product in Japan. What are they going to do? 1913, Papa Ernest gets offered a job. Pack up his abalone recipes, bring them to San Francisco to that sophisticated audience up there. They offered so much money. He had no option to close his restaurant here in Monterey, packed up his family, packed up his recipes, moved to San Francisco to a restaurant called the Wharf. But even then it was still a tough sell. 1915, the World's Fair comes to San Francisco called the Panama City International Exposition. The huge World's Fair that opened on the opening of the Panama Canal. It had opened a couple of years before. We've all been to San Francisco, seen the Palace of Fine Arts. It was built for that World's Fair. It was just a big mud flat, all filled in for that World's Fair. It was only there for 1 year, right? 600 acres. Every state was represented. California, the largest state building, was 5 acres in size. Every county of California is represented in that state building. And Monterey County was the largest exhibit, and one of the main things that Monterey County was exhibiting, abalone. Even had a mannequin dressed up in all that dive gear in a case. And the front level cannon company giving away canned abalone to all the guests who come to the fair, sending folks down to the hospital for full abalone dinners, and soon the whole world on its pop. Hotels, restaurants, all want this new sensation, abalone. Pop says there's money to be made here. Packed up his family, packed up his recipes, and moved back to Monterey. Actually lives out of Point Lobos, worked with Alan Kodani for about a year. He actually sets up in that whaler's cabin at Point Lobos. We had a little assembly line of pounding abalone, preparing abalone steaks at hotels and restaurants in Northern California. In 1919, he goes down to the wharf, opened the very first restaurant on the Monterey Wharf, initially called the Club, because it was the old Monterey Yacht Club. It quickly became Papa Ernest, became known as the Abalone King. Abalone steaks, abalone salad, abalone stew. He used to serve the stew in the abalone shell. He filled the holes in the shell with lead. Just a little lead, not very much. But here's the thing, and why this is really important. And because of that recipe, he invented his restaurant in 1908. He literally saved the Japanese abalone fishery, not just in Monterey, but all of California. Because of that little recipe he invented in 1908, by 1920 there were 9 full-time Japanese companies operating off the Monterey Wharf. 1929, the California abalone industry got close to $1 million in revenue. 75% of it's coming out of Monterey Bay. At part of World War II, the majority of the business on the Monterey Wharf, Japanese-owned fish markets, abalone processors, all because of the recipe that this guy right here invented a little restaurant in 1908. So I've been doing this work, as I mentioned a few times, for a long, long time. And it is my opinion, and I don't debate anybody on this issue, that the abalone fishery is the most important fishery in the history of California. It was not economical, but it is historical and cultural. Everybody uses it. Very, very important. So here's Papa Ernest here. By the way, here is a very famous menu of Pop's here. He would mash up mark himself. Notice the red fan. Always wore that red fan. Nobody knows why. Not even his name. But look at something he got that world's name. Pete Warren, it was a market too. People remembered him. More importantly, people remembered his restaurant. This menu he used as a giveaway. It was done by two very famous artists. Anybody recognize the artwork here? So the middle section was done by a very famous artist by the name of Joe Mora. And the outer section was done by a very famous international artist named Armin Hansen. And it is for free abalone dinners. You go into that, Google those names, a lot of stuff comes up. Back to the old Monterey Bay Museum actually has a large Joe Mora collection. See that over there. All right, we're going to go this way.
So why did the state ban the export of dried abalone?
It was a way for them to try to control the fishery.
Okay.
And it was kind of a racial thing too. Do you know where the name Monterey comes from?
Where the what?
Where the name Monterey comes from? 1602, Sebastian Vizcaíno, a Spanish explorer, was on a mission from Spain to sail along the California coast to find safe ports for a big gun turning for the Philippines. If you know that Manila Gantre story, 1565, Spain finds her out, takes across to the Pacific from Mexico and right in the middle of Manila Bay. They got to Manila. Manila was like this gigantic Walmart. Has really cool stuff. Stuff from Japan, stuff from China, stuff from the Spice Islands, stuff those guys wanted to have. Metals, gold, and silver from Mexico, those guys wanted to have. They began trading. They had to find a way to come back. You couldn't come back the same way you can because you're finding these currents. It took a couple of years, but eventually found that same route, pushed those Chinese fishers across that black tide. This trip can be very dangerous. It can be weeks, sometimes months. There were storms, there were diseases, there was scurvy, and scurvy was an awful thing. You could safe port, you could stop, make repairs, and take on fresh water and fresh supplies, and just rest. That was this guy in his job. He was out there in a special ship called the Caravel, little guy designed just to sail along coastline. He sails along this California coast. He sails along this California coast, comes into this harbor in December of 1602. It had been after a beautiful day, and he witnessed this place all together. The Rumsien folks were singing that fog song that day. When he arrived here, the free ship anchored somewhere off the breakwater there. It was a very cold, heavy winter. There was snow in all the mountains here. There was a lot of water in all of the rivers in the water here at that time. In fact, some scientists told me there was once a mini ice age going on at that time. He dropped his longboats into the water and he rode through the harbor here. And there's a little river that runs on top of the casino there into Monterey Bay. It's actually still there. Anybody know what the name of it is today? It's now called Winipro Sarah Creek, actually. And it runs right into the Monterey Bay right here. And so, but at that time there was a lot of water in it. He ran his longboats up that little river there. It was camp. The city up there, if you know the city up there, where the city has a museum up there, a parking lot, and he's camped about that area there. It's about 10 days here. Loved this place. He named it after his sponsor, the Count de Monterey, which I thought pretty smart on his part because it was supposed to, and he knew he discovered land after a saint, right, San Diego, but no, he named a guy that was paying his bills. He wanted to settle Monterey then, wanted to be named governor. They had some other issues, they had some war issues, they had some financial issues, so they backed off. But it took them close to 170 years to get back here. But imagine those Rumsien families, you wake up in the morning, walk out of a little 2D house, look out in the bathroom, you see some ship the size of a whale. Like having a UFO landing in your backyard. The Rumsien people have a story they used to tell about a whale as small as a man. The story goes, this whale was from Southern California to Monterey. And past the Santa Barbara, swallowed this man. Walked through the north, close to Monterey, and began to feel sick. Close to Monterey, the sicker he got. Finally, looked in the harbor. He was feeling sick. But he stretched that man on the beach right here. When we saw that man in Santa Barbara, the man was brown. When he spilled on the beach here in Monterey, the man was white. And that's how white people came to Monterey. If you think about the story for a minute, you see some ship the size of a whale sitting on white man Monterey onto your beach here. It makes perfect sense. All right, so this bike trail, this walking trail, I'm sure you all know, is the old right-of-way from the South Pacific Railroad, built after 1887. It's all landfill. So it used to, the beach used to come all the way up to here, right? But then it was all landfill. And it was all built by Chinese labor, so you got Chinese folks to think it's a nice bike walking through all of this. So you can see that rock our property is right there.
Yeah.
And that's the Whipplesdale Creek into Monterey Bay. Right there.
Ah.
There's a bridge actually right here that across the creek there. If you look close, and then in the Hotel Amani had beach pavilions here for their guests. So if you look across, see where I'm pointing in that rock, there's a big iron eye hook.
Yeah.
In the rock there? That's just left over from the old whaling days. The whalers bring their whales into here at high tide, that's when they do it. And they make the cuts on the whale. And they wrap up ropes of cable, run it through that eye hook and that rock right there, onto the beach here, into what they call capsule, a big pulley system. They push that capsule, and the whale is still in the water. The blubber comes off like a big orange peel.
Oh my God.
And they then tote it back up.
Fascinating.
So that hook there is for
The whaling buoy?
That's for whalers. That's how they use it. Run the cable through that hook onto the capsule that was on the beach here. So here we are at Sardine Mecca. This is the foundation of the old Booth Sardine County. I mentioned Mr. Booth's name earlier on. So we'll put Monterey on the map. We all figure out Monterey and fishing. We all figure out sardine, right?
Yeah.
The sardine fishery was the largest fishery, single fish in the history of the United States. And California and Monterey, all for a fish. I will tell you, never in the history of that fishery was a fish anybody ever wanted to eat. It was never a popular fish to eat, ever. Mr. Booth was in the salmon business. Salmon was going on the map, right? And in the 19th century, salmon was king. And most salmon fisheries at that time up in the Sacramento River area, up in Northern California, they weren't doing very well in the late 19th century. And so all the salmon processors formed this co-op called the Sacramento River Pack Association. And heard these big landings going on in Monterey. And the big landings happened because of those technology that changed with those tourist fishermen, and also technology that Japanese fishermen brought with them when this other central fishermen. So Booth comes in, this is great. Tried to get contracts with Japanese fishermen. They said, you're going to get contracts in markets in San Francisco. So he backs off. Gives me a shed out there, that 155 building out there. But between that time, the city of Monterey leases this very piece of property to a guy named H.R. Robbins, and I've seen Mr. Robbins' lease. It says on his lease for the purpose of sardine cannery, production plant, dance hall. Need to say that Mr. Rollins is not the greatest businessman. And Booth bought him out in 1903. He got the contract with Japanese fishermen, began to can salmon as his main fishery, and began to experiment with these large sardines that came in the bay at the end of the salmon season. That right. But he needed sardine fish at this point because most of the Japanese were leaving Monterey in that salmon season to go work in the ag fields in Central Valley, California. Only turn in the spring with the salmon. As I'm sure you're all aware, at the turn of the 20th century, there's a great deal of anti-Japanese sentiment in this country, coming primarily from white workers, convinced the Japanese were coming to take their job, which really wasn't the case. But in 1905, Mr. Booth says to the local newspaper, not going to hire any more Japanese. He called for him because he didn't really mean it. He already had Japanese workers working his cannery, and he was going to buy salmon from them when he turned in the spring. And to give you an idea, by the way, of how large that salmon fishery was, at the end of the 1909 salmon season, which lasts 3 months, May 15th to August 15th, the local newspaper reported in that 1909 salmon season there were 185 salmon boats fishing in Monterey Bay. 145 of them were Japanese owned, catching an average of 1 million pounds of king salmon. 1 million. In 1990 salmon season, they caught 1,500,000 pounds of king salmon. 1910, they caught 2 million pounds of king salmon. That is a lot of fish, right? So Mr. Booth began to experiment with sardines. He needed sardine fishermen at this point. As I mentioned, Japanese leaving. And it was that instant he sent for the Sicilian fishermen, already working for him up along the Sacramento River fishing salmon, and then in Monterey started fishing sardine as that small secondary fishery in the fall and winter months. Well, these guys, these Sicilian guys, they weren't skilled fish fishermen, they weren't sure how to do it, but they remembered they lived in Sicily, sailed across the bay in Tunisia, Well, these African fishermen did fish like the sardine and the anchovy, and we used to stuff the type of net. So somebody here in Monterey writes something about the system and said, go ahead and get us that net, send it to Monterey, which they did. We built the airport to the customers over here. They called it a lamparo, lightning Sicilian because it was fast, and began to fish sardine in the Monterey Bay. Here is a photograph taken in 1906 of early Sicilian fishermen fishing sardine right in the middle of the Monterey. And you can see all the, here's the net full of fish. How that operates is got lead weight on the bottom, glass floats on the top. This guy right here, his name is Pietro Ferrante. He's responsible for all these Sicilian fishermen coming to Monterey. But to give you, if you're a good captain like Pietro Ferrante, you know that if you take care of your crew will take care of you. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Right. So look, this is what he would use to float his nets. He used these bottles, just like this one right here. Got around the bottom. Those days you put a carbonated bed in the bottles, up like this, the carbonation will pop the cork. It's on the side like that. He didn't have that problem. He used these bottles, and fill these bottles with beer. Use them to float his nets in the cold water of Monterey Bay, and when all done fishing, they pull off the floats, everybody had cold beer. So, how is it we went all that salmon, those 2 million pounds being caught in 1910, to this guy becoming the largest fisher, single fish in the history of the United States. All that salmon, about 90% of it, was going to Europe, going mainly to Germany. They pickle it, lox, right? In those days, people in the United States ate a lot of sardines. Sardines were very, very popular all over the United States. Sardine is kind of a generic word. It's all small, silvery fish referred to as sardine. But the catch in California on the west coast here is this guy known as a pilchard, or the true sardine. People want to eat. Well, those little guys coming out of the North Atlantic, coming from Spain, coming from France. France is a big sardine producer turning the 20th century. What happened in the world in 1914?
War.
Because of all that salmon going to Europe, all those sardines coming from Europe, and they just switch. Begin to heavily fish sardines along the west coast. There were sardine cannons in New York State of Maine, but those guys couldn't fish because of a German submarine out there in the Atlantic. When first began to fish these guys, Mr. Booth didn't think they were going to buy them. This is the first national ad for Monterey sardines. It appears in the Susan Roebuck catalog in 1905, being advertised down there as souse, those are pickling spices, broiled mackerel. He's selling these as Monterey mackerel. But even in 1905, the federal government said, you cannot call those mackerel, those aren't mackerel, those are sardines. They marketed these fish initially to the African American communities as salmon sardines, and marketed to the Jewish communities as herring sardines. Tried writing to sell this product. He used to produce these beautiful recipe books like this one right here. But on the canner, they'd give you one, or they'd mail you one. Oftentimes you bought cans down at a cake, they put one in the cake. All the great recipes for sardine sandwiches, and sardine rarebits, and sardine salad. My favorite is sardine jello salad, made with lime jello, chili sauce, Monterey sardines, which I've made a few times. Write that down. Right? So, when we began to have the fish sardine after 1915, we began blueprints drawn up, plans being made to build sardine cannons all along the waterfront, starting at the wharf number 2 there, way down there. The folks at Hotel Del Monte were very unhappy with this idea. They're convinced you put sardine cannons on the waterfront, tourists won't come into Monterey.
Yeah.
They had a lot of economic power in this town. They actually had a petition going around to stop this fish from even developing. The city of Monterey said, wait a minute, there's money to be made here. All your sardine processors go way down there to the Ocean View Avenue where nobody goes. And that's how Cannon Row becomes Cannery Row. And Mr. Booth could stay right here because he was already here. And this really the only cannery that was a Maui proper was this cannery right here. All the other ones are all in what we call New Market today right here. As I mentioned, it was all for a fish that nobody really wanted to eat. The real money never was in the canned product. The real money was always in the byproduct. Take the head, tails, and guts and grind up other parts. Defertilize it. Next thing you all go to the market and buy chicken for dinner. You can thank this guy right here for that chicken dinner. Before 1920, the chicken industry in California, actually all over the entire United States, was not doing very well. People did not eat chicken like we do today. It was kind of expensive. Began to produce a cheap chicken feed, the head, tails, and guts of the Monterey sardine. The chickens loved it, thrived on it. More and more chicken was being produced. The price of chicken went down. People began to buy chicken. My friend Bill Ripple used to say that Foster Farm chicken owes its life to the boom of the Monterey sardine. Absolutely true. All right. So here we are. Here's Booth Cannery here. This picture's taken about 1906 as well. And we're actually standing right about here. That's where we are right now. The Booth Cannery and the rail tracks here. The net in the back drying out. In the early days, everything was done by hand. The boats would come in and pull the fish up the boats with these baskets, walk behind the cannery on these racks to dry, walk them into the cannery. Everything was done by hand to the point where actually hand soldering every can. Very slow process. 1906, the year this picture was taken, he hires a guy, Booth hires a guy named Newt Hogan to manage his cannery. Hogan was from Norway and worked at a cannery in Norway, went to a fisheries college in Norway, and he introduced the idea of commercial dryers and sealing machines. And then in 1916, Hogan broke away from Booth because he saw the war going on in Europe. He knew his money to be made here, moved down and built his own cannery where the Monterey Aquarium is today. Became the largest cannery, the longest operating cannery on Cannery Road. I won't go into the history of Mr. Hogan, which is a very interesting history of his, but you can look it up. A very interesting history of his. All right, here's the backside of Booth Cannery. So this cannery was here until 1939 when Booth retired. He died in 1940 in the city of Monterey, tore it down in 1948, and this is all that's left of it. And there was a wharf that extended all the way out, almost to the end of the wharf, our wharf right here. They tore that down in 1970. That's Rosalia. She's a patron saint of the Sicilian fishermen. This tradition goes back hundreds of years in Sicily. And what it is that it's a women's thing, and when the men folk, the husbands, the sons, the grandfathers, the uncles are all fishing, all the women folk will pray to Santa Rosalia, they all come home safely. When the Sicilians started coming to Monterey after 1906, they brought their families, they brought this tradition with them. And they used to have what they call the Santa Rosalia Festival. It was always on the second weekend of September, towards the beginning of the sardine season. Actually, the sardine season started on August 1st. And in the old days, it was all the sardine boats. And they still have it, but it's now called Festa Italia. It's always on the same weekend. And so this statue went in 1975. So everybody here is Sicilian, or knowing Sicilian. There were two different groups that were involved in it. The Sicilians don't always get along. In the process of this, the one group that was involved with the plaques you see here, which depict the history of Sicilian fishermen, they said, heck with you, you can't have our plaque. And they went into some guy's garage. We opened the museum, the Maritime Museum on the waterfront in 1992. They were donated to the Maritime Museum. I had an art collection there. They closed the Maritime Museum in 2017. I was brought in to find holes for the collection. I spent about a year doing that. And the first thing I did was a plaque along the Santa Rosalia. There they are. There's been a wharf here since 1845. This wharf was built by Thomas Larkin, the Mexican government. It was sort of a crib work kind of set up here. 1870, the Pacific Steamship Company came in, and there were other big companies on it. And they had ports up and down the west coast and went across the Pacific to Asia. And they built a proper wooden wharf that was here. The Hotel Ohlone opened in 1880. They built a wooden boardwalk that stretched from the hotel all the way down to this one. It was sort of a touristy thing then. They had fish markets and glass bottom boat rides and sailboat rides and beach pavilions on the beaches, that kind of thing. But as the sardine fishery, abalone fishery really begins to develop, it becomes a little working man's work at that time. And once the sardine fishery collapses in the early 1950s, when it collapses for a lot of different reasons, it reverts back to that touristy work that we see now today. In about 1910, the city of Monterey took over this work. And so all these buildings belong to the city of Monterey, and they work with the business on here. There's sort of symbiotic relationship between the both, and they take care of the work that you see. I guess you've all been to the aquarium, right? Aquarium is something that people have talked about for a long, long time. At the turn of the 20th century, F.E. Booth wanted to put an aquarium right there at the foot of the wharf. He wanted to use the Monterey Bay as its water system and focus to feature all the fish in the Monterey Bay. At that time, the Custom House was part of a fraternal organization called the Native Sons of the Golden Rose. They're still around, those guys. And they're working together. They like the idea of the aquarium too. So they approached the city of Monterey and the Chamber of Commerce, and they said, aquarium? Nobody's going to build an aquarium, forget it. So he didn't build it. Newt Hovden later on proposed building another aquarium in Monterey. Same idea. And it turns out it never happened. The first aquarium actually was here, built in the 1940s by a named Charlie Hyder. It was there until the 1960s. And it was sort of a quirky aquarium. I remember it as a kid. It had sort of tropical fish and sea turtle. And in the back they had sea lions in a tank. And for 25 cents you could buy a bag of squid and you could feed the sea lions and jump up and grab the squid from it. And this is the best part because I was a kid. In the gift shop, you could buy for $1 live baby alligators.
Oh, yeah.
Which we take home and let go in our backyard. And this is going to grow into giant alligators, or I'm sure some raccoon ate them almost immediately. So, hey, we thought that was cool. But Charles also producing stuff like this, all left over the sardine abalone fishery. So in 1913, it made illegal to ship dried abalone out of the state. You couldn't ship the shells out of the state either. They used to dump them off the wharf here. Hoppers just give them away. They truck them out to the sand dunes in Seaside or Sand City. And they were making stuff like this. Charlie Hodder and other companies sell their stuff all over the United States. It's all abalone in this resin right here.
Yeah.
I love it with thermometer. I got some stuff that goes back to the turn of the 20th century. Salt and pepper shaker, all kinds of different. I like it. By the way, in 1952, they made a movie here on the wharf called Clash by Night, starring Marilyn Monroe and Barbara Stanwyck. And in the movie, Marilyn Monroe plays a cannery worker, and Barbara Stanwyck is like the bad girl. She's been away from town for like 20 years, and she comes back and causes all kinds of problems. So at the beginning of the movie, the train comes along the track here, stops right in front of the wharf, and then Barbara Stanwyck gets off the train, walks down the wharf into what was in Angela's restaurant. She goes into that restaurant. That's a Hollywood set, but the interior of that restaurant. They film in the cannery. They film also on Cannery Road, two different canneries down there, the Oxnard Cannery and the San Xavier Cannery. And I had a friend of mine, old Frank Tanaka, worked in the Oxnard Cannery. Worked up in the boxing room, he told me. Whenever they're making the movies, they take a big range and jump machinery so the box couldn't come down. I'll go down and look at Marilyn Monroe. It's actually a pretty good movie. It's a very adult film for its time. But you can watch it, you can rent it. It comes up on YouTube a lot. And you can find it on the Turner Classic Network. You can find it. Yeah. I highly recommend it. Actually, the best part is you can see at the beginning of the film, you can see all the sardine boats coming out, going out, and coming back in and dropping their catches into these sardine hoppers. Monterey Bay is the only place in the world where they use that kind of system, delivery system. But when they made the film in 1952, there were no sardines here. They had to truck them up to Southern California to be in the movie.
They were all fished out by then?
Yeah, they weren't fished out. Yeah, they just weren't any here at that time.
Yeah. Okay.
Enough to make their movie
Yeah.
popular. So, as I mentioned, prior to World War II, the majority of these businesses on the world were Japanese owned. Most of these Japanese fishermen come from a particular area of Japan. Anybody here been to Japan? So, Japan is broken up what they call prefects, kind of like states. When you went to Japan, you flew into Narita Airport, which is in the Chiba Prefecture, where these guys all come from. They come from an area known as Ninamboso, which is way down the tip end of Chiba Prefecture. It's about 2.5 hours southeast of Tokyo. I've been there many times. And the first time you go there, I was given a tour of a little neighborhood, and my sort of counterpart there pointed out all houses as diver house, diver house, diver house. All these houses that divers lived, they came to Monterey like 130 years ago, right? And for the most part, the family still owns these little houses. They don't necessarily live in them. They haven't changed. And so I went into many of them. And the first thing you see in every house has these shrines to Monterey. We had no idea they existed until 30 years ago. Look at these abalone shells. These are world record size. You could take a bath mat shell. That's how big it is. It came out of this bay 130 years ago. That doll was purchased home department store in Pacific Grove in 1927. This Mr. Kuragami's house, his granddaughter today is a professional doll maker in Japan. And she made a doll that we now have on exhibit in my little museum I have that I curate at the JACL. So I'm sort of bridging those two communities. All right, one last thing. This is my old friend Roy Hitori. Roy is the last of the Japanese abalone divers. Roy is the only diver who was born here. He was Nisei, second generation. All the other divers came to Japan, and there was a couple of steps and all returned to Japan because they're working on contracts. And by the way, a helmet diver's life as a diver is about 10 years. Because it's very hard on your body, that kind of work. Although some of these guys did it for years and years. Very, very hard. So I asked Roy how to learn how to do this. He told me he was a young man. He had just graduated from Monterey High School, not much older than you are right now. His father got into the abalone business. During the Depression, had a lot of debts to pay. He thought this was a good way to make some money. He had no experience in this business whatsoever. But friends that were in it. In fact, Roy's older brother worked on an abalone boat. He wasn't a diver, but he worked as a tender. Bought some equipment, took Roy in a little boat in the middle of the harbor here, dressed him up in this wool underwear. In fact, Roy told me his mother did this underwear. Puts on his clothes, put on a big heavy canvas suit, attached the 65 pounds of the lead weights to his front back, put his leg to his shoe, bolt on the helmet, and just tossed him off the side of it. Did you start running down there? That's how he learned to be an abalone diver. Then I asked him, luckily for Roy, the older diver, took him under the wing and kind of showed him what to do. And I asked him, I said, Roy, what kind of problems do you have down there? Here's Roy, here he is, getting ready to go diving, his brother and cousin. If you look at the helmet, look how dented up it is. Right? He said, yeah, he said, sometimes the currents are really strong, kick up rocks. And one time a rock kicked up his helmet, cracked the glass on his helmet. Now, if you're 30 feet below the Monterey Bay, you just crack the glass on your helmet, what are you going to do? You want to get to the surface, right? Well, they can't just pull him up. He weighs too much. He has to release his valve on the side of his helmet. It'll fill up the suit with air, but eventually float him up like a big balloon. But even that will take too long. So what he does, and this is the most remarkable thing, he reaches into his abalone basket, pulls up an abalone with just a big marine snail, takes the abalone, stick in the glass. The abalone seals up the crack to stop the water from coming in. Goes to the surface, change glass, starts all over again. He told me an older diver taught him how to do that, but I have an idea.
Wow.
Let's listen to Roy tell us that story.
Glass inward. So then a stream of water came shooting in. So I immediately, remembered that story, and I got an abalone out of my bag and put it on there, and it just immediately stopped that water. It's really amazing how quickly it shapes to whatever surface it hits. But I got a little wet, but it was nothing compared to having your faceplate gone.
Well, that was recorded in 2011 at Hopkins Marine Station for all the professors there and the students there. He died about a year after that. I thought it was done. Very cool. All right, so I think I bored you guys enough.
Fantastic.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
By the way, I do curate a small museum. If anybody's interested, JCL Hall, Japanese American Center, to tell that abalone story. So my work in the last 20 years primarily focuses on the Japanese story here and abalone fishery in particular. Is all that story. So I like to tell people that it was abalone money that built the J.H. Hall, and which is true, but also abalone money built this Wharf Walk at the end. Big business. So we don't have any real set hours at that museum, but it is open on the third Saturday of every month from 10 to 2. And if you call me up, you open up appointment only. You can call me up. I'm happy to open up the show too.
Yeah. You've got there's a website.
There is, the
Yeah,
JCL
yeah.
website.
Yeah. Can I have a picture?
Yes.
Author. Wow.